Ever since the introduction of COVID-19 lockdowns, globally there's been an increase in the reported cases of gender-based violence against women and girls. America, China, Spain are some of the countries that have reported a high increase in domestic violence. Zimbabwe has not been spared, as Msasa Project reported that ever since the lockdown, cases have increased to as high as 140 calls a day. Kurowa, kurasirwa chikafu, kuoneswa pornography, kunyimwa chikafu, kubatwa chibharo, ukuncitshwa ukudla, ukubanjwa inkunzi, ukuncitshwa imali are all examples of gender-based violence that women and girls are facing in Zimbabwe. This is COVID-19 Talk with Nyari Mashayamombe. Yeah, you got that right. It's a new series of Identities Umhlobo, where we talk about everything COVID-19. How are you surviving? How are you keeping safe? What's happening across the world? How can we survive with each other in safety? There's gender-based violence that has started to erupt, but also online we're hearing about great challenges that people are doing that are fun. Whatever you're doing in your community, we want you to tell us how you're doing it on the numbers on the screens. But today we want to discuss the gender-based violence in our communities as we are locked down. And to discuss this in the studio, I have the beautiful lady from Sasa. Madam, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you. I'm Precious Taru, Executive Director from Sasa Project.
Thank you very much for coming, Sasa. Can you tell us the context of gender-based violence in a crisis like COVID-19?
What I want to say is gender-based violence has always been there.
Right.
That's a fact.
Mm-hmm.
But what we normally see is when there's a crisis, when there's a disaster, when there's a pandemic, women and girls tend to be more vulnerable. To bring it down to the lockdown that we're currently in, ideally meant to keep you safe from COVID.
Right.
But what that has unintentionally caused is a spike in gender-based violence cases. We have been monitoring gender-based violence since the lockdown, and what we are getting across our platforms is that yes, gender-based violence is spiked. Why am I saying so? If we consider the number of calls that we normally get in a month,
mm-hmm.
in a normal month, that
right.
is, they range between 500 to 600.
Mm-hmm.
That's in a month.
Right.
But you're getting 864 calls
in
a space of 17 days. That
wow.
means we've actually doubled.
Right.
So that's why we are saying there is a spike in gender-based violence, and women and girls are now more than ever vulnerable because they are restricted to movement.
It's just so shocking that we have such a spiking of gender-based violence against girls and women especially. Of course, we've also had a number of cases against men. But what is the nature of the kind of cases that are coming?
Like you reiterated, gender-based violence does not affect women and girls only. It also affects men. But what we do acknowledge is it tends to be on the higher side when you look at the women and girls.
Right.
We have done an analysis of the cases that we have received, the 864 cases that we have received. And what we are noticing is physical assault or physical violence is the more predominant. And zvatiri kuroverana zvacho zviri kusiyana-siyana. Vamwe tiri kuroverana nyaya yekuti wabikirei nemavheji. Vamwe tiri kuroverana nyaya. I think what we are also forgetting is with this lockdown, the mode of survival or the form of income for most households has also been affected. Where I was able to go and sell my tomatoes and get some money and then able to come home and buy something to eat, I can't because I'm restricted in the household. We also are receiving a lot of, quite a number of cases on sexual violence, which is also worrying. Marital rape is also now predominant. We also are receiving a very, very worrying trend in terms of psychological violence.
I want us to come back and discuss that psychological violence when we come back from the break. Do stay with us. We're just taking a quick one. Welcome back to COVID-19 Talk with Nyari Mashayamombe, where we are hearing the sad stories about how people are are no longer safe in their own homes. And the United Nations has called that it's a pandemic within a pandemic, where women and girls are now suffering even more. And you were beginning to talk about the psychological stresses and things that are happening in the home. Please continue.
When we talk of emotional violence, at times it's not about me being physically assaulted, but at times it's the actions or the words that my husband or my partner or the person that I'm living with can do. So what other men have decided or are doing is you simply pack your bag.
Wow.
And some are telling their wives, I can't take this anymore. I can't feed the family. I also need to be taken care of. So they are deciding to go to small houses where they can be taken care of, because they, the number of people maybe they have to take care of is smaller than your own family. So these are some of the sad realities that are coming out. And in some of these instances, this is where couples end up fighting. I can give an example of a man who decided to bash his wife's head because he felt that the meal that she had cooked was not something that he wanted.
Wow.
And you can even notice that there have been previous issues that have been going on, and he decided to beat his wife, and the wife ended up having head injuries. These are some of the issues that are coming out, and it's a sad development within our country, and we do hope that it doesn't escalate more.
I think for me also, what I've realized in our community is there's an entitlement by men for women to cook certain things. I mean, in that same setup where you expect your wife to be cooking, we anticipate that you're expected to provide for your family. So if you are failing to provide for your family, what do you think is providing that meat for you? And also, I just want us to then say, okay, this is happening. Do we have help in the community?
I think one thing that we have to realize is gender-based violence is very much perpetuated by power dynamics. And one form of power that we use is the power over someone. And in our current scenario, I'm the man of the house. I make the decisions.
Make the decisions. Man of the house doesn't it mean kuunza mari?
Is what I get. And so when you have your own frustrations, when you have previous issues that were not resolved, some men feel that if I use power over this woman, I am addressing some of those issues. But for us, we are saying conflict happens, but conflict does not have to lead to violence. There are so many ways of handling conflict. You asked, do we have in our communities, do we still have help? We understand with the lockdown, most people are locked down in their households. With their abuser. So you cannot move around. But what I do want to say is we still have ways of communicating. And one thing that I would want to encourage women is you don't need to keep quiet about it. Yes, violence is violence. It can never be justified.
When we come back from this quick break, we want to talk about, practically speaking, if someone is going through it right now, what can they do? Or if they know somebody who's going through it right now, what can they do? But if you want good meat, buy that meat. You're not a child. You need to work for your meat or for your whatever. But most importantly, I want to then come to you where you are saying that there are ways of resolving conflicts. And I think part of that ways of resolving is facing yourself, being truthful to say, but first, secondly, what are your responsibilities? We want to talk about this when we come back. But this is COVID-19 Talk with Nyari Mashayamombe. Don't go away. We're coming for the last segment. This is COVID-19 Talk with Nyari Mashayamombe. Today we're joined by Msasa Project, which has told us that there's been a hike in the number of gender-based violence ever since the COVID-19 lockdown, as well as just generally COVID, because it's become a crisis and it affects people differently. We were already talking about the attitudes, what is happening, the kind of abuses that we're witnessing. I mean, I'm not wanting to be sexist about this, but I have had a lot of feedback. We've been running a lot of campaigns around gender-based violence. There's been a lot of feedback from especially men who want the conversations to be shut in WhatsApp groups. Of course, there are also men that support conversations, but is community ready to end gender-based violence, or there's still the blame of women, girls over whatever is happening to them?
Yes and no. I want to give an example of what we've experienced during this lockdown. It's quite commendable that you actually get some of the calls that you get where you're being notified of violence being perpetrated are coming from men.
Oh,
so
nice.
They're actually telling you, please come. Quite a pakati budiswa mudzimai nevana vari panze vari kurohwa izvozvi. This is 12 midnight.
Right.
But we also do acknowledge that we are still a bit far from where we want to go. We still have other sections of the community who feel that we don't need to talk about gender-based violence. We still have other communities that feel that it's part of our culture to beat a woman. And normally when that woman is beaten up, the person is wangawaite. The blame is on the woman.
And that's irrelevant question.
And that irrelevant question, the impact is actually much bigger than what we think. Right. Because the victim or the survivor who has been beaten up can internalize that and think that I am the one to blame.
Absolutely.
So where should I report? And we are also perpetuating this culture of putting the blame on the victim, on the person who has been abused.
Right.
What we have to acknowledge is violence is wrong.
Right.
We don't have any justification whatsoever
right.
to say that a woman deserves to be beaten.
You spoke earlier on how is this affecting the girls and the children, by the way, when their parents are fighting or when they witness gender-based violence?
You know what happens? Children learn behaviors in different ways. The behaviors that they adopt is through what we tell them, but it's also through how we do what we do.
Right.
So if I'm a dad, I'm seen beating up my wife. What is that child internalizing?
Right.
And what product at the end of the day are you going to produce? So at times it's not about me and my wife. It's about me and my household. What am I teaching to my children? I
know there's been cases reported to you. How is the response from those who are service providers, the police, the law enforcement, the courts and everything? And how has gender-based violence been incorporated in the COVID-19 response mechanisms?
I want to acknowledge that there has been some support, and I do want to acknowledge that we have been working very closely with all partners within the referral system. I want to cite the victim-friendly unit. They have been supporting victims of gender-based violence. We get calls, we refer cases to them. But we also want to acknowledge the challenges that we are also seeing within the referral system. Right. I think as a country, what we've noticed is we have not built up a very comprehensive and a very good response system for gender-based violence. As in Msasa, our recommendations to the COVID task force is one, we need to resource all players in the gender-based violence response system. We are talking of victim-friendly units. We are talking of our hospitals, which means our victim-friendly units should be able to respond adequately when a call comes in. We understand they've been giving this support, but they need more resources. We also need our health facilities to be able to respond when a client has been abused. We know some clients, for example, are not being able to access antenatal care. They are being referred to big hospitals because they are closed, they don't have PPE. But we have clients in our shelters who need that kind of support. We also need to consider the issue of reintegration and relocation of survivors. Are they safe where they are going? Do we even have something as government that we are providing? I know women, households are being given $200. Have we also incorporated these women who are being relocated also to be given something so that where they go, they can also be, welcomed.
Right.
It's very difficult to just put someone in a household without anything, considering the current climate that we're operating in. So these are some of the issues that we are saying. When we are putting down these policies, let's also remember we've got a special group of women that also need to be incorporated in our overall policies that we put as a government.
Amazing. That's very comprehensive response from Mrs. Precious Tao, representing SASA Project here on COVID-19 Talk with Nyari Mashayamombe, where we're exploring the shadow pandemic that is now a problem within a problem. So what are you doing in your community? Let's end gender-based violence. But most importantly, we've heard the call for the government to incorporate mechanisms within the COVID crisis to make sure that there is comprehensive response to gender-based violence, to maintain the dignity of women, and also to ensure that they have access to basic services. Until next time, have a good one.